Thank you all for being here. We weren't sure if there would be a couple people or many people. The subtitle of this event is Unscripted and Under the Hood. I'm not here with a PowerPoint. I'm not here to give you the prospective student orientation or what I might say at a chapter event or how I might talk about co-op to a conference of my peers in academia. I'm here, one Antiochian to other Antiochians, largely just because as I meet more and more people, and I know many of you, we've had conversations and hopefully many more to come. But when I tend to talk to alumni for the first time, I get a sense that they really want to hear about the mechanics of co-op today. The only way that you would know how to ask such detailed questions is if you went through the Antioch program yourself and if you lived through multiple iterative co-ops. And so this is really just a chance. I'd love for it to be an open-ended conversation. You can ask any questions about the structure of our curriculum, how co-op is, how it runs and how it's operated, how we're managing our jobs list, what are students doing these days. We can talk about the bigger picture of Antioch Works, which you might be familiar with as one of our kind of new, like our leading promise program is how I tend to think of it, and how Antioch Works is being managed and implemented programmatically by the co-op program. And in general, maybe some conversation about meaningful work and the changing nature of work today. That's always something that I love to hear from people on. So it's really quite open-ended, but I can, if you'd like, start with a little bit of an overview of just myself and how I came to be in this place and how we're running the program now, just a real skeleton. And I encourage you to interrupt me at any question. At any point, you can interrupt me at any point. And I'm happy to take your questions, and just know that this is informal, unscripted, and it's just a chance for you to really see under the hood. That's the point. And as we go forward, if you want to invite other people, or if it makes sense in your mind for this to become something other than an unscripted chance for conversation, then I'm open to all ears. I think we're all interested in what alumni want to talk about and what you guys want to know. So, sound good? Are we all in? Any big questions before we start? Okay. So my name is Brooke Blackman Bryan. Blackman is my maiden name. Bryan is my current legal name. It's a breadcrumb I'm leaving because pretty soon I'll be going by Brooke Blackman on paper, and I didn't want anyone to think I was someone else. And so you'll see me as Brooke Blackman Bryan on paper, but if you want to email me, it's B Bryan, so BBRYAN. And a fun fact at Antioch College right now, there are 3 of us whose email starts with BB. So you could very easily send an email to Beth Bridgman, also here in co-op, or to Beth Barnes over in student services. So be careful with us double Bs. Auto populate. We'll send it perhaps to your closest BB friend and perhaps not me. So it's Brooke Bryan. I have been, where does my Antioch story begin? I started attending Antioch in 99, the winter of 99, so the 99-2000 school year. I graduated high school in 97, had a little bit of travel and other college, and then I transferred in. And I would be an alum of, I'm just going to say 01-ish, and I say ish because I didn't stay, I didn't graduate, I withdrew. And I have a lot of reasons for why I withdrew at the time. I did end up finishing later through the World Classics program with Jim Malarkey, which is technically an Antioch University degree, but technically we were all, so I don't get stuck on that. But my Antioch experience was part of what was then called the Ohio Scholars Program, which was a program meant to meet the expected financial need of high financial need students. It was meant to cover, it was a last dollar scholarship program. So it's a program that's pretty similar in its intent and cause to the scholarship portion of Antioch Works today. So I was a first generation student, kind of a black sheep of my family. That was something that I thought in academia for a really long time I needed to kind of hide under the rug. And more as we recognize that the rising student demographic of today is really largely first generation students, I have come to appreciate and respect my own non-traditional college experience. And I think that is part of what makes me a good mentor for our students and someone with a little bit of an academic vision that at times might be a little different from others, but I feel that I have my boots on the ground and I understand the sensibilities of students today in a way that I believe will help co-op to be something that all students equitably can have access to. For instance, when I was a student, people were going to California regularly for co-op. And even though I was smart and relatively quick on my feet, going to co-op in California never honestly occurred to me. I had access to the same advisors as my peers. I had access to the same job list. I heard in the cafeteria people saying they were going to California, but people in my family just didn't go to California. There was no one in my family prepared to, for instance, buy a plane ticket for my co-op in California. I started here at Antioch with an EFC of 0. And so in some ways I have a vision for what co-op is and what we need to be, what Antioch is and what Antioch needs to be really, if we are to walk the talk of our promises, if that makes sense. So a lot of the work that I've done in the last year has been backtracking the promises that we've made and trying to backfill with strong, replicable programs. I want to make sure that our promises have programs behind them. And so we could talk about that and what that looks like and the things that we've been doing. But my formal title is Dean of Cooperative, Experiential, and International Education. I have a faculty title as well, but I won't bore you with that right now. The way that co-op is structured is that within this broad rubric of cooperative education, international education, and experiential education, which I'm going to call meaningful work. Within that broad rubric, we have the first main segment, which is what you all are familiar with and what you went through as Antiochians, co-op. And so for us today, co-op is credit bearing. A co-op term earns 12 academic credits, which is a win. When the college first reopened, we were only awarding 2 academic credits per co-op term, which was perhaps a decision that was made early on, which was perhaps a little too conservative. I think we wanted to not have any issues with accreditation. And so we, over time, actually ended up having really meaningful conversations that can demonstrate, we can demonstrate that the experiential requirement is worth more academically than we first stepped out of the gate with. So students on co-op earn 12 academic credits. That is based upon a Carnegie unit seat time calculation of 30 hours per week on the job, and then a small course in which students write home to Antioch throughout the term, doing reflective stuff about their co-op. So for some people they write, for some people they do multimedia, other kinds of documentary asset mapping of the community that they're in. So for most of us, this is a change. So you understand the experiential component of co-op. For us right now, it's 11 weeks for a term, 30 hours per week. That's the minimum. But the piece that's new since reopening is that students are in a course during their co-op. And I have to tell you that this is a mechanics under the hood conversation, right? So I can be real and share anecdotes and fun jokes and experiences. When we first started running this course alongside co-op, we would sometimes hear from our students who were employed by alum, what do you mean? This is crazy. You have a class while on co-op? We don't have a class while on co-op. So we would have students come back to us and say, well, my employer doesn't think I should have to do homework right now because I shouldn't have a class while on co-op. I'm supposed to do it when I get back. Well, that was then and this is now. So it's one change of the program, but it's a change that we feel is pretty important. Number one, it means that a co-op faculty member is in contact weekly with a student who's out on co-op, no matter where in the world they are, on a regular basis, either by email, synchronously or asynchronously in a course environment, and also by way of reading the writing that students produce every week. So the idea is that there's an experiential learning, theory or pedagogy, right? The art and science of teaching. So we think of this as community-based learning, and part of that experiential pedagogical loop is that we want students to reflect on what they're doing and what they think it means to them. Now we recognize that what they say the week of is not the same thing that they might say 5 years later in reflection, or even 5 months later, right? But there's some value in having students reflect in an ongoing way. They build writing skills. They learn different topographies of personal reflection. I don't know if you've noticed, but in American society today, the way that we tend to write about our experience, if we're writing about our self-experience, we tend to write from an emotive, confessional voice. And one of the favorite tools that we have in our co-op classes is a reading on writing about the self that introduces 4 other modes of writing that aren't in the style, if you may, of confessional emotive writing, meaning a student might start reflecting on their work experience by saying, this happened on Thursday and I didn't like it, and this made me angry, and here's how I feel about it. And so we start there and we say, okay, it's good, we're reflecting on our feelings. But by the end of the course, or by the end of a couple co-ops, we will have introduced other modes of writing. One of them is analytical, descriptive, one of them is imaginative, realistic, one of them is, there's different modes. And so that's just by way of a small example. Is part of that writing and reflective capacity that we're developing over time. There's also just another benefit.
Just ask you a question
that
really relates to that. I am thrilled to hear that you will be in contact on a weekly basis. That's amazing, and so great, because Tiffany and I, over the months that we've gotten to know each other, have reflected on how much of a difference that would have meant. The only thing I wanted to ask you, sometimes, for me anyway, the emotive, only because it was a struggle at times, and I didn't have the capacity to articulate quite what you're saying. I mean, I sort of knew what wasn't going well, but I wasn't that good at articulating it. And so I hope that, I mean, I don't want the phone calls to be forever, but I would encourage that exchange to have some element of, how the heck are you feeling? How does it feel to be there? Do you feel okay? Almost frankly, in a mental health capacity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, your point is well taken. So the other important piece of being in contact with people is that the sense of isolation is real. Transience has its impacts. And so being in touch with people is oftentimes a chance to say, how's it going? How are you doing? A lot of our students do struggle with a sense of isolation or depression. It pops up. Anxiety, we tend to hear these things through students writing, and we're able to respond in real time and to stay in touch. On a rare occasion, things come through those reflections that, cause us to want to pull in other supports. The college also has ways of offering remote counseling, so remote mental health support services that haven't necessarily been around for all of time. There's, new modes of actual certified counseling that can happen over a distance. And we've been working here just in the last 6 or 8 months to really try to strengthen what we know we can offer students at a distance who are outside of Ohio. And believe it or not, there are a lot of things to think through there. So definitely, we don't rule the emotional confessional voice out at all, but we do try to introduce other modes of reflection as well. And it is a chance to stay in touch with people. Karen has a comment or question.
Yes, well, your description of the academic credit for co-op, it reminds me of something that, and I think I shared this with you, that the DC area alumni offered a symposium where the students, and I think that there were 20 co-op students in DC at that time, and a whole lot of alumni. But they met in my office in the conference room, and every week we had somebody come in and speak, and it was usually an alum to come in and talk. The topics were how to make policy at the local, national, and international levels, because we have all of those levels in our the colony of DC. We had a syllabus, but I also had sent Brooke and I think Tristan as well, the list of co-op jobs that we had at that. And I have often thought of, I've tried to think regularly of how former students and future alums can interact. And this was an excellent way. I would love, even if there's only 2 or 3 co-op students coming to DC area, I'd love to try to do that again and have that be the in place academic part of the co-op experience.
Yeah, I love that. And thank you for forwarding me some things. I have them printed right here at my desk. I think that cohort model is a really good one, meaning, co-ops are very individual, and each co-op is one person going into a relationship with one organization, right? And oftentimes living in a different place. So I think that's what's special about our model is that, we don't have a summer program in which everybody comes into one organization and goes through the same summer training program, and then they're with their same cohort of 18 other peers through the whole summer. There's the sense of independence and agency that you have to figure out how to navigate the world when you go into the world, into your own position and have to figure everything out is a big part of why I think co-op expedites personal development, right? But if we have a number of students in a city, even though they're all having a pretty singular experience, if they know that they're together, and if we find ways to connect them to a chapter a couple times while they're there, maybe first with a welcome event and then later on with a how you doing midterm kind of event, I think that's really special. It's, to me, the best of both worlds. So I can't say that we've had anything close to those numbers for some time, but I do think that the model is livingly present for us. And if we have good clusters of jobs in a given city, that the promise of sending multiple people to one city at a time is always present, at least for me personally. And I have printed, Karen, these old job lists and have some ideas. And I'll also talk about the Moocher's Guide later. Hi, Jean.
Yeah,
Thanks for.
But I also want to say that alumni are wonderful co-op employers, and there are many throughout the country who offer co-op jobs. And that's another way that true alums and former students can interact.
For sure. I would say the majority of our job list is either an actual alum who's an employer or an alum who has pulled some of the strings of their network in their given city. Maybe they're on a board for an organization and that organization is an employer. I would say that, or just a friend, your personal and professional networks. The entire co-op job list is through and through. In so many ways, we have our alumni community to thank for it very much.
And providing housing for co-op students that don't get paid much for their job.
Absolutely.
I counted them up. I've offered housing for at least 14. I kind of lost track. Co-op students over the years.
Yeah, you've been a wonderful support for that entire DC network. And what Karen says is true in the greatest sense. A student can accept a well-compensated, wonderful next level job. And if they can't find housing, short-term affordable housing in a major metropolitan area, then they can't take the job. So housing is oftentimes the sine qua non. I want to move on to Tiffany, then Mark, then Steve.
Yeah, hi, Brooke. So I would say, first, I'm excited to hear where co-op is moving. So I'm also a first generation college student and really struggled with co-op. And I've been having some talks with Dean Creeping Bear about doing some recruitment in Pittsburgh. I work at an organization that focuses on equity and education in the city. Mm-hmm. And so I do have access to high school students and families. And part of my hesitancy is sending low income first generation college students, not because Antioch wasn't a wonderful experience on campus, but because of the challenge of, your parents helping you pay for school while you're also working and trying to, make it on co-op. So that's a big relief.
It's absolutely true.
And my hope is moving forward, if we're able to get some students from Pittsburgh, we have a large network of nonprofits that are always, hiring, and I think would be a good, if we're able to get students from Pittsburgh that can come back home and maybe find, housing with relatives or friends, that, we could then tap into that. But just really appreciative of your work and excited to hear that there is a focus on like ongoing support, but also making that, making co-op be something that can be successful for students that don't have a lot of resources.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a number of funds and endowments that we provide direct student scholarships from. So irregardless of what they're compensated at their job, we're able to produce travel stipends. We're able to produce secondary compensation to help a student find housing. I feel as though we are resource rich in that area, and that the amount of support that we can harness once we understand what a student's needs are, I believe it's unparalleled in higher ed today. I truly do. So not only do we have the program, but we have the capacity to ensure equitable access to the program. And that's something I can't say when I was at Antioch years ago. So that's a big part of how I'm spending my time. And before I move on, I'll just say, I once came home from a trip to Philadelphia, which was organized by Roger Ashodi, and I went all through Center City. I couldn't get from one meeting to the next fast enough. Came home with 16 new jobs in Philadelphia. And would you believe that as I sat down with students with a whole pamphlet of our new Philadelphia package of clustered jobs, you know what they said? I think I really want to be in Pittsburgh.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, we are.
That was some years ago. That was maybe 6 years ago, but I was like, where did I miss the memo?
Yeah, post-industrial, people love it.
There we go. There we go. So lots of work to be done in Pittsburgh. Thank you. Mark, I think you were next in stack.
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to piggyback what you were talking about and what Alan indicated. The mental health issue is really critical because back in the day, when Alan and I were on campus, there was no internet. I don't think that the co-op office would be happy to use a Watts line once a week to call about 50 to 100 students. So all that was impossible. And it would have been really nice to be able to talk to somebody, because I remember distinctly when I went on my first co-op, which was terrifying because I'd never worked before and I was new to the United States. I wasn't even sure the campus was going to be there in winter of '74. So I spent the entire fall trying to figure out what I was coming back to, if I was coming back to anything. And so I just want to reinforce this, because there are crises that take place and that have to be sort of managed. I also wanted to point out something about the job itself. It can be an academic learning experience. I'm speaking selfishly in terms of what I offered to 3 Antioch students working, doing research at the Holocaust Museum and in National Archives. So they were picking up stuff that they'd never even touched in their entire lives. So I think you need to sort of measure that in terms of giving them homework once a week, but also keep in mind that they are learning something on the job and they actually are acquiring intellectual skills and, and new concepts, new knowledge. And back to the writing issues, I presume that you're not duplicating what's going on campus, because I would hope that the faculty would be also emphasizing critical writing skills. Hear you.
We can't hear you, Brooke.
Okay.
Forgot I muted myself. So yeah, excellent points, Mark, across the board. We have institutional LALOs, what we call LALOs. They're learning outcomes, liberal arts learning outcomes that are across all classes and across all iterations of academic experience. And one of those is focused on oral and written communication skills. And so we each, there are a number of different classes, an arts class versus a, English composition class versus a philosophy or history class versus a co-op class. Uses those LALOs or enables activity around those LALOs. We animate those LALOs in different ways, but we're all pushing towards the same goal of critical thinking, synthetic writing, different modes and genres of capacity. So definitely a lot of coordination there. And when I first came into co-op as a faculty member, I was here for, I think, about 5 years as an instructor in co-op. And then I actually moved over to run the writing program for a few academic years. And so in that capacity, I was teaching English composition. our 200 level writing requirements, which is expository writing, and some higher level like electives. And so I have seen the writing piece from both sides, and I have a pretty good sensibility of the kinds of technical forms of writing that are really highly appropriate for co-op experience. And to tie into your first comment, the writing that students are doing, in some ways it's personal reflection. And in other ways, it's bringing what they are doing on the job back into their curriculum. So it's not meant to be running in parallel, disconnected. So if a student is producing a executive summary on 5 oral histories that they've listened to, right? If your assignment at the Holocaust Museum is to listen to these 5 oral histories and figure out how they might fit, which ones might meet a curatorial vision for the museum and the next exhibit that's happening, the work that that student is producing for you is very much the work that they can be turning in for their class, with some extra umbrella context as to why they think this was a meaningful thing to do. So it's meant to be inextricably interwoven. And it's not all the time. Not every student's job has that level of intellectual engagement, but you'd be surprised that even the small jobs, students can have incredible reflections. We have philosophers working on farms, and you can't tell me that working on a farm isn't an intellectual experience based upon the writings that they come up with. So, but those are excellent points. And for me, so my background is oral history and philosophy. I call myself a phenomenological oral historian for short. Some of you might be on the alumni Facebook group, and there's a really fun thread. You can go read about me and my faculty bio if you want. But I would say that having students engage in research experiences as undergrads is something that's very close to my heart. And what that means is that during a co-op, a person can actually do primary source research using, for instance, the method of oral history for interviewing, and come back to campus as a senior prepared for their capstone project with primary source interviews that they have collected from undergraduate fieldwork. It's not for every student. It's not something that every student wants to do, but for those that have those aspirations, we have probably more than 30 people have gone through this process and established archives of their own primary source research that they've done while on co-op. So definitely something close to my heart, and that I can talk about more if anybody has any
Yeah, you can
interest.
indulge me just for a second. I'm glad that this is all happening, because at the time I had a run-in with my co-op advisor for my first co-op, actually, because the place where I went to ended up going on strike. And so I basically joined the strikers, and Mr. Abrams was not very happy about this, because when I came back, he said, well, what do you have to show for yourself? So I had taken a whole bunch of photographs during that whole period, documenting the strike. And I brought the photographs to him, and he sort of raised his eyebrows, and he finally acknowledged that I had done something. And the other irony was that I was paid to be on to work with the union, but I wasn't paid by the museum. So it all worked out at the end, but I think it's really worth developing this. And I think it's a great idea. Thank you.
I can show you some exhibits if we have time this time or another time. Yeah, those are fantastic points. Let's go on to, I think it was, so Steve, then Robert and Alan. I don't know which of you was first, so we'll take a stack in that order, whichever way. Steve.
You provide some information on an issue that I was concerned about, and that's financial support for students going out on co-op. I was administrator of a medical program at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City in the late 90s. And we were able to hire a couple students, but that was because there was the work study program. So the institution itself paid a relatively small part of the overall salary. So I'm interested to hear more about what resources are available for students who want to go out on co-op to a place like New York City or Washington.
Yeah, that's
housing is something else that, I think we need to be supportive, but just in terms of the salary itself.
Yeah. So I'll try to answer in shorthand, and then we can open up wherever the conversation is of most interest. Generally speaking, the way that we run the program, the way that we build partnerships is with an expectation that our partnering organizations bring some form of compensation to the table, that we stand over and against the unpaid internship crisis, that people who want to partner with us, they're bringing young people with new thinking into their organizations. They'll bring innovation into their organizations. And so that's the place we begin new conversations from. There are, of course, some entities who will never find a budget line or who are very comfortable with unpaid internships, meaning they have some sort of namesake or phenomenal program where if it's not an Antioch student, they've got students from other schools lined up. If a person wants to be an intern with a photographer at the National Geographic or work in a window in a area of the United Nations, we're not going to be able to stop the unpaid internship crisis there. But for most of our partnerships, employers who partner with us are bringing some form of compensation to the table. And I think that's really important. Where that fails or where that isn't enough, we have our own funds that we issue stipends via award letters. We have a couple funds that focus on international experiences. The most significant of those is the Lloyd Family Foundation Fund. We have a couple funds that support students who are doing some form of working towards social justice. We have a fund that is specific to travel support. It's meant to be given in $500 travel support increments, which is oftentimes a good piece of the airplane fee, that someone will need. And we at times can actually issue a stipend from 2 funds for 1 student if we need to. So the way that a student receives these funds is they're meeting with their co-op advisor, they're applying to more than 1 opportunity. As those opportunities, they generate a cover letter and a resume for different opportunities. The faculty here in co-op steward those applications, contact directly to see if they're going to get an interview. If they have been interviewed, we're looking for an offer. If a student is made an offer, the compensation package that might be on offer from the organization is made clear at that time. Sometimes it's a stipend with housing. Sometimes it's hourly pay. Sometimes it's a total amount of funding, for whatever the period of work is. And so at that time, the faculty advisor and the student determine where that compensation package leaves the student, and if the student has remaining need in order to take this up. And one thing that is of interest, I'm not determining need based upon direct communication from the financial aid office. We determine need based upon a student's aspirations and our long form relationships that we build with each individual student. So we're able to make things happen in ways that I think afford us a lot of latitude in understanding who a student is and what they need to really truly have the experience that we think is the next level experience that they're ready for, right? And I appreciate being able to run this program in that way. I'm not beholden to whatever their federal financial aid calculations are. So I will issue award letters. I probably write anywhere between 10 and 20 award letters per term. And those award letters go out at the end of the term when they have accepted their co-op and it's part of their formalization. At that time, they do a series of agreements, which are their emergency contact, their liability waivers, their temporary residence information. So by the time we issue funding, they're ready to issue their agreements essentially. And that happens at the end of the term. And then we're in touch with students. I have everyone's flight information on my Google Calendar. I don't know if you've worked with Google Calendar very much, but as soon as there's flight information in your email, there's people flying back and forth through my calendar. So I have a pretty good sense of when people land, especially for international experiences. We have an international checklist, and we have students do travel insurance that provides an extra level of support should they encounter any kind of trouble or natural disaster, or as you know, we've been programming through a pandemic. So if there are upticks that would raise the level, the State Department warning level in that area, sometimes we have to assist a student to leave an area if some kind of event happens to where the State Department would raise them beyond a certain level. So there's a lot of programming that goes into this, but our ability to direct funding and to be honest, it's really alumni support that we're directing directly to students to enable them to have a phenomenal co-op experience. We can talk more about those different funds and how they're organized if you'd like, but I know that there's other questions. So is that good for now, Alan? And we can come back for more details?
You're muted, Alan.
Sorry, that wasn't me. I have a different question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Who just asked that question?
I did.
Oh,
I
I'm
did.
sorry.
So,
It was you.
when
It
you
moved
talk
on my
about
screen.
financial agreements that are worked out. So, the work study program not only covered people on co-op, but also jobs on campus and people
Yeah.
working in the cafeteria. Is there still federal funding, kind of
Yeah.
like work study that, okay.
So let me just speak to the part-time work on campus, which we are also organizing. And that might give a bigger picture because you did mention federal work study. So the federal work study program is the financial aid based state, well, it's not state, it's federal, but it's given out in blocks to schools. My understanding is that our student population is low enough that our federal work study share is pretty insignificant. So we have on-campus jobs that also fall under our rubric and that I help to lead the program for under the idea of experiential education. So these are non-credit bearing part-time student experiences that are work on campus. And when I was here, it was called the FWSB program, right? Federal Work Study Program. So the FWSB program would be equivalent to or similar to the way that we run our Antioch Works campus jobs program right now. So we have about upwards of 70 available jobs, anything from a TA or RA with a faculty member to working in the kitchens and in admissions and helping to run the Olive Kettering Library or the Wellness Center. About on average, 50 to 54 students work part-time each term. And the way that that program is built is that it's 10 hours per week because this is in addition to their study terms. So they're making essentially $10 an hour, 10 hours per week while they're on their study term. And 100% of our students are eligible for that work study program on campus, even though we don't have as much of a federal match for those hours as we would like. We're still, it's part of the Antioch Works commitment. And I feel pretty excited about the kind of jobs that are available on campus and the number of students who are working them. It's very helpful to us in co-op also, and the reason that it falls under meaningful work generally and why my program runs it. We oftentimes can take a student who enters in their first year with no work experience, maybe even very little like volunteer experience. We can take someone and help them work through their first year, build their resume with them based upon their on-campus jobs and position them to land a co-op when otherwise they didn't have very much experience. And this also populates into the community through the Miller Fellow Program, which you may or may not be aware of. It's an external endowed fund that helps us place students in nonprofits in Yellow Springs so they can work on campus in different areas of the college, or they can work in the Yellow Springs community at nonprofits doing good work in Yellow Springs. So the ideal study work sequence of a first year, they study for fall and they work a part-time job. They study for winter. They're getting closer to confirming what their co-op is. And then they go actually out on their full-time job in the winter. So that's the study work sequence of a first year. Great questions. I'm happy to be able to talk about Antioch Works and the Student Jobs Program as kind of aligned under a vision of meaningful work, broadly, because it's not co-op, because it isn't credit bearing, but it is led by our program and organized with the same kind of understanding and respect for experiential education. Do you remember our stack? Was it Alan, then Robert, or what do we want to do here? And then Jones at the end.
I'm flexible.
All right, I'll jump in. Hi. So first of all, I'm really happy to hear so much of this. I'm actually, and as Tiffany is, we're on the what we're calling the co-op committee of the alumni board.
Yeah.
And so it's really interesting because we really want to figure out how to work with you in ways that make sense for you and the vision.
Yeah.
We did talk about perhaps being a part of that check-in. And again, that's something to talk about. But the other thing, he's not here today. Denwood Parrish, who is on the committee, raised an interesting question when we had our first meeting, which was, for instance, he's in, I don't know exactly, I think Sarasota, Florida, which he said was kind of a tech alley of some kind. And he expressed well, I guess the concern that if he goes to work trying to set up a co-op, which he thought he might be able to do, well, it would be hard for him to do it and then not have somebody in mind, because it would, it's a bit of a presentation, to pull that off, and so it was something I wasn't, aware of myself, but it did strike me as something interesting to think about.
Mhm.
And then just finally, it would also be beyond the co-op committee, as you all know, the alumni board is about many things, but it's also about money.
Yeah.
And, to be able to have a concise,
Yeah.
I don't know, description of what's going on with co-op
Mhm.
as you're describing it, would be remarkably compelling
Yeah.
to alum who may not be so inclined to give for all sorts of personal reasons.
Mhm.
Maybe something that Mark and I talked about,
Mhm.
and it would really, it's like, oh my God, look what's happening here.
Yeah.
That's exciting, to
Yeah.
alum. So,
Yeah, so in terms of giving, there's Antioch Works as a broad promise program is a place to support first gen students broadly, whether to help us bring about all of the learning outcomes. Then there are these different earmarked funds under co-op that go directly to student stipends, either under that general operations support of Antioch Works or in those stipends like the Young Travel Fund. In my opinion, we might be the highest touch program in all of academia in terms of our level of thick advising and the experiences, the meaningful experiences we're able to help steward students toward. I think that's a really hard thing to talk about in shorthand when you get into marketing and it's spectacle. How can the homepage of my website, appeal to the most students? Ours is not there yet. We do have a new VPAA, Vice President of Academic Affairs, who is going to bring superb form to our content, I believe, in short order. And I'm really excited to be working with him. His name's Brian Norman. I'm sure you'll be hearing about him in numerous ways soon. But it is difficult to talk either to the larger public or even to have a chance to talk to alumni about what we're doing because it's such a thick program. It's so detailed and layered that so much gets lost in translation. But because you've been through it and you kind of have a sense, I believe our program is second to none. And I think that the amount of support that we're able to move directly towards the benefit of student experience is also second to none. Even if you're supporting overhead at Antioch, we don't have that much overhead. We're a very student-focused program, the world of academia writ large. I'll stand by those words, but we can talk about them more.
I'll just say that sometimes as in that committee, we make phone calls.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you don't have to talk for 20 minutes, you
Yeah.
can get a concise thing, or we do letters, of course.
Yeah. And Alan, your point about developing jobs without a student in mind is absolutely, it's the arrow through the heart of our program. It's both the most magical thing to develop a job and to have a perfect right fit student for it right away. But it's also, sometimes we develop jobs and a student, it might be the best partnership we've ever developed. And we might put it on the table to 5 students and they might all say, nah, it's in Pittsburgh. I want to go to Philadelphia, and so that's, it's one of the challenges of running a program with such detail and such singularity, right? It would be much easier if we said 20 students can go to Philadelphia this year and 20 students can go to DC and that's it. That's all that's on offer. Then it would be easy to develop really rich partnerships in those areas. And we would have the confidence of responding to those partners to say, yes, I can get you a student every term. But because we're a program built on student agency, where students truly do have choice, we call them co-op placements sometimes for short, but we're not placing students. We're stewarding students to opportunities and students choose which opportunities they want to take. And it's what makes our program really special in the world of higher ed. It's also what makes our program really hard to steward and to deliver. But I don't think we want to lose that quality. So we just do the best that we can to keep up, which is, it can be a lot. It can. Yeah. So excellent points. Robert, then Joan, then Jesse, then Mark.
Thanks, Brooke. I was just going to quickly say either you or Alan mentioned what's his name, Brian Norman, regarding VP Academic Affairs. There's a presentation tonight at 7 o'clock. Probably most of you will be there anyway. One quick minor comment as a compliment to co-op and the international aspect is, to my point of view, and there's other factors that came into play, but in my point of view, the reason the college reopened was because of co-op and international and the impact it had. Question I have for you, which of course naturally, like many things, didn't exist when I was a student, but as a complement to the program, is you didn't mention anything about what I'd call the transition co-op post-graduation. That idea is brilliant.
Yeah.
And if you're not going directly to graduate school, which I wasn't, were left hanging to some extent. Do you want to articulate on that point?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Thank you. So the Antioch Works Promise program is basically 4 pieces. One, it's the last dollar scholarship that says, if you come in as a high needs student, Antioch will meet your need from what the federal government says your family can pay to your last dollar. The second piece is the promise of on-campus compensated work, right? So we talked about that, the 54 students working, about 70 jobs on offer. The third piece is international experiences for all. This is complex, I won't lie. Usually at Antioch and in higher ed in general, language learning is connected. Your achievements in language learning is connected to your ability to go on funded international experiences. And the way that the Antioch promise was first articulated took away that commitment to language learning. So we are in the process of refiguring that commitment to language learning. Every student has a oral proficiency that they're expected to meet as a base part of the general ed program to be able to graduate. So previously, our funded international experiences were tied to 3 years of language learning, but not all of our students want to do 3 years of language learning that takes them to the capstone. So that became, in some ways of thinking about it, it was exclusive. It excluded some of our students from funded international experiences. So now we are rebuilding that based upon the oral proficiency, which happens in the second year for most students. So we're able to, through that Antioch Works Promise, bring international experiences to a broader array of our students. And I want to mention AEA later, don't let me forget, but back to—
So do I have a comment about, let me just add a comment, and that is, when I was a student in the 70s, of course, not of course, but language requirement wasn't a requirement. However, my comment is, with all due respect, I'm familiar with Carrie and he's quite competent, Carrie Campbell. But my general comment is that language courses, after you've done the most basic retard course of introduction, are not very effective on campus versus going to an immersion program where you catapult light years ahead.
I had a meeting with Brian Norman on this topic just yesterday. And it is my goal that that we in co-op and through a new iteration of Antioch Engagement Abroad, which is now what we're calling it instead of Antioch Education Abroad, because we're clever and we're reclaiming the program one way or another. It's my idea that our blocks, so we have a JA block, which is July, August, the summer block. And we also have a November, December block, which is our sort of winter block. These block terms, a month of a short 4-week block term, are becoming fairly commonplace in academia. It's a short term for experimental fun things. And for me, one of the supports our students need is immersive language learning. And I want to implement, and my team has been hard at work. Rick, Louisa, Beth has been hard at work for a couple years planning for international immersions that will be focused on language learning, which can really help a lot of our students, especially first-gen students who might not have had that in high school, be sure that they can meet the oral proficiency. So Antioch Works, as the third part of the Promise program, expands the number of students we're able to offer funded international experiences to, with some immersion possibilities there that we're really excited about. The fourth piece, which I wanted to push, I can go on tangents, so you have to pull me back sometimes. But the fourth piece is what the board originally called launch co-ops, right?
Yeah.
And this is our particular version of post-baccalaureate success.
That's for everybody, right?
It's for everyone. It is for
Okay.
everyone. Yes. I can't promise you that in the long run, we'll continue to call it launch co-ops, and there's reasons for that. What co-op means to people in the broader world, what it means to a prospective student and their family is usually not what we understand with the term. For us as Antiochians, it's a shorthand. It's a shorthand word that means a lot of things, and we understand it because we've been through it. For prospective families, it's a question of whether that term is able to carry the information that we need to carry when the words that they're used to hearing are career readiness, career preparedness, that their major is somehow tracking them through internships to be on course to get a job. So we're hard at work figuring out, how do we map the language that we use while staying singular, right? How do we map the language that we use to the language that other schools are priming families' ears to hear, right? Brian Norman is actually going to be a big piece of this. But the post-baccalaureate success program is something that we have just, I can't quite share it because it isn't entirely, maybe in a couple more co-op coffees, I'll be able to share it. But we have a really nice overall umbrella structure that will allow us, if it goes through, that will allow us to really start building within the co-op network of the co-ops and the part-term jobs to really start building that post-baccalaureate success program. We may or may not call it launch co-op. The reason why, not only our students' understanding of what co-op means, but also co-op for us means credit-bearing experience. And whether we want to conflate that with a post-baccalaureate experience, branding language versus conveyed meaning is something that we're thinking a lot about right now because we need to get it right. But we're excited about the program and its potential. The reality is that a lot of our co-op jobs could be filled by recent graduates. And then on the flip side, one of the things that we have to think about is if an employer who's a co-op partner employs a student who's graduated and they keep them there, how many of our co-op jobs would actually be filled by recent graduates who are doing phenomenal work? Will we be able to regenerate the iterative co-op experiences for students who are still moving through the program? So things to think about in the big picture, but exciting potentials.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think I'm next. I have questions about the employers and the array of employers. So please tell us, do you have enough employers? Where are the gaps or the needs? And do we have legacy employers who have been employing students for years and years and years, even before the closure?
That's a great question. So maybe from the backwards first, and remind me if I forget, if I drop part of your question. So legacy employers. Antioch has long-standing relationships with organizations such as the American Friends Service Committee, Camp Hill, residential. We have a number of ongoing relationships with organizations that have been Antioch partners over the long haul. It's not always out of the same office. So it might be a Chicago office on a different funded grant program and the next time it might be a different office out of a different window. But I think that some of our long-term partnerships are really still strong. And coming out of the pandemic is giving us an opportunity to reach back out to those sort of long-term legacy partners. And we are currently thinking through some resources that we have on our desk. For instance, you might have seen something like a Campus Pride Index. Shane Creeping Bear out of admissions recently brought to President's team this, it's called the Campus Pride Index. And it's an organization that is putting forward a social justice index for queer students, LGBTQ plus students, gender nonconforming students. And it's asking colleges to self-evaluate per the questions on the index as to whether we are really doing the work to create safe spaces and inclusive spaces and we are looking at those indexes that are available, whether on any facet of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and starting to ask ourselves whether one way to regenerate some of our long-term partnerships coming out of COVID. Sometimes it's a phone call that says, hi, we're still here. Are you still there? You know, we love you. You love us. We're still friends. We've got you on the job list. But another way of approaching that is to say, hey, we're working on some really interesting diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. And if you were able to reaffirm your partnership with us and to reaffirm these 3 diversity, equity, and inclusion points, then we'll be able to feature you as one of our highlighted partners that provides a certain level of inclusivity. And so these are just ideas. We don't have a program that's ready to launch. Again, I promised an under the hood mechanics, insiders only kind of conversation. So you're getting a little bit of in-process stuff, but finding a way to continue to build meaningful relationships with legacy employers who are mission driven, who are mission aligned with the Antioch mission and vision is really important to us. The next category of employers I would say are people who employ students regularly since reopening. And most of these are alum, really, truly. We have attorneys who hire one of our students almost every single time we send them an application. And they not only they're utilizing students as actual paralegals, they're in the case files, they're watching surveillance video, they're suiting up and going into court. And the alum is driving them to court saying, I know this judge, I'm guessing the judge is going to rule this way. If they do rule this way, then here's our plan B. If they rule this way, then here's our plan C, right? And students come out of these things writing their reflections. Again, they're writing about their experience in their co-op journals. And so we hear about these experiences and they're like, wow, this is how the legal system works, or I can't believe this is exactly how it works. One of our students, a Black trans man, actually was serving as a paralegal with one of our employers and was mistaken by the judge to be the person who was there on trial. And they wrote about it on our Antioch Engaged blog. It's real. So the first line, access to the real workings of the world, is real. And many of these employers that employ students regularly are alum. The second thing, there's a lot of different ways to describe the pipeline of employers, Joan, and we could take this anyway. Feel free to ask me more questions. We're all the time developing new partnerships. Sometimes they're one-offs. Sometimes a student will bring forward an idea, and then we'll call that organization and we'll make an opportunity happen for that student. And sometimes it's a one-off and we never partner with that organization again. But other times the student says this was really phenomenal, so we'll do our best to convert that from a one-off into a new partner on the jobs list. And as mentioned earlier, the real drawback at all times is if somebody gets excited about working with us, but then we have the next class, we might place 60 students one term and then only 40 students the next term. So we don't always have a guaranteed number of students. It's just true.
So my question was, do you have enough co-op employers, and where are the needs? Where are the gaps?
Yeah. Do we have enough? It would be nice if we had a list of employers on one side of a piece of paper or whiteboard, and then a list of students on the other side. And if we could just draw a line from student to employer, right? If we could have a program that was based upon one-to-one correspondence between available students and available jobs, it'd be a lot easier to answer that question. And sometimes we have lots of available jobs and students with no interest in taking them. They want something different. And it's complex because our stewardship versus their agency, is sometimes not, entirely, it's a fuzzy logic by which they choose their co-op experiences. In general, I feel that we have enough jobs. I feel we have enough partnerships. Where we need a new kind of partnership to meet student desire, based upon what they really want to do, I feel that we have enough capacity to get on the phone and to activate our resources. I feel that our alumni community has enough networks that if we talk to the right person, they might know someone who we can call. I also have experienced that when I get on the phone and I make a cold call, sometimes people are incredibly receptive to working with us. I've made phone calls and hung up a half hour later with a whole organizational history and a $3,000 stipend on the table with a student, ready to interview tomorrow. So I feel that we have enough in that broader sense, if that makes sense. Jesse, were you next, or Jeff? I guess are we over time? Did we only say we can do this for an hour? Do we have to stop?
Tristan just wanted to be sure we were respectful of your time. If you can stay on, Brooke, that's entirely up to you, but we are about 10 after 1.
I don't have to run anywhere right now. I'm happy to take the last couple questions. And I hope that if you guys join me for co-op coffee again, maybe we can, just peel back the layer of the onion a few times even further. If you have
I'm
to
good.
go, you're welcome.
I'm
to sign off.
going to interject with so little time left. I was expecting something about the Mooch book.
Yeah, the Moocher's Guide. This is a lot of fun. So we've been working with Scott Sanders. We've been pulling out Moocher's Guides from the archives, and we have an administrative assistant and we have a student worker who is a phenomenal graphic designer. Our thinking right now, it's still emergent, but our thinking right now is that we'll end up having a Moocher's Guide for every major city where we have co-ops and where we have a chapter. And that Moocher's Guide will name the people in the chapter who self-identify as wanting to be in the Moocher's Guide. It will identify other places, basically all the resources that we can cluster in one area. I don't think it will be exactly like the Moocher's guides were of the past, which once you get them in your hands, they're really a name and a phone number. So it won't be like that. It will be information curated a little bit differently, but we hope to, within the next year, have one for every chapter. And some chapters, like New York, for instance, they have a welcome basket with a bus pass that they just combine, and they just buy a student a bus pass. They do a welcome event. So the Moocher's Guide will hopefully be the welcome packet for every chapter sometime in the future. And we have a lot of work to do there. And maybe that's a great way to collaborate with the co-op committee as well. Mark, I still see you for your question.
Yeah, it's quick. It's simply about the co-op advisors. I think it's indirectly tied to what Alan was suggesting about matching students to employers.
Yeah.
Frankly, I never thought that there was any prerequisite. And perhaps that was kind of the magic behind the co-ops, because you never know who you get and you never know how that student's going to react. And sometimes it goes sour, but most of the times it was actually quite a good experience. And at least from where I sit, I had the feeling that it was part of their job, the advisors, to filter us and then not send some goofball to some major organization. So I'm not too worried about that part of it. And in fact, I think it's best not to try to stress about matching the ideal student to the ideal employer, because you'll never get out of the barn. I mean, the part of the co-op experience is that challenge of experimenting. And that's the real world. As an employer, you hire somebody and you're never quite sure what you get until that person starts working. So that was what I have to say.
Yeah, and Mark, you're right. I mean, the relationships that co-op faculty build with students, we really get to know people. What we're searching for as we get to know them is, what are they ready for? And sometimes we think they're ready for more than they are, and they get someplace and the isolation is too much and they have a bit of a flop, right, in terms of their relationship with the job. But a flop on co-op doesn't always mean that it wasn't a successful learning experience. So if something bad does happen, in most cases, we can recalibrate and position them in another place that will allow them to finish the co-op successfully while learning probably something pretty significant about themselves, their capacities, and their next steps. But we do try to do a certain amount of filtering where we're learning from you as an employer what you need, right? So the demonstrated skill sets that you need for a person to walk in and begin doing the job versus capacities that a student has that aren't yet demonstrated skills because they haven't had a chance to unfold them, right? And this is a challenge. And I feel we get it right a really good amount of the time. And sometimes it doesn't work. And
that's life,
It's life, it is. But those students that have a hard time, if they have a hard landing on their second co-op,
they do well. Yeah,
really do. It's phenomenal. I just say co-op expedites life.
Yeah, the first one is always the roughest.
Yeah, for the most part, there are students that struggle, and sometimes their struggles become more apparent to them through co-op, which is also in and of itself a learning experience.
True.
I've really appreciated talking to you all today. I hope that this is a little bit of a fun insight under the hood. I hope we can continue these conversations. Jeff, do you have any words in closing?
You've kind of already mentioned it. We're going to do another iteration of this on the 23rd. You're welcome to join us for a second round of this, but I would encourage you each to invite other Antiochians. We want this to be a big party. We want people to get reconnected with the program as it stands and the program as to where it is headed. So I want to thank you for spending close to an hour and 20 minutes with us. It's truly appreciated. And we hope to see some of you on, I believe it's the 23rd. Is that correct, Brooke?
I think so. That sounds right.
Okay. We'll be in
Thank you
touch.
all.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Brooke.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brooke. Very kind of you.